Galactic History's Worst Mistake, Kidnapping Human Children, HFY Sci-Fi. The Mysterious Disappearance. The quiet night on the human colony planet Terra Nova was broken only by the soft hum of the artificial moonlight above. The colony had always been a peaceful place. Families lived in harmony, their homes nestled in the lush forests and fields that stretched across the planet. It was a perfect world for raising children. The air was fresh, the water clean, and the days always seemed bright and full of promise. No one could have imagined what was about to happen. As the clock struck midnight, an eerie silence fell over the settlement. At first, it seemed like just another ordinary night with families tucked into their beds. But that silence, though calming, was unnatural. It hung in the air like a heavy fog. Something was wrong. It began with the children. At first, no one noticed anything out of place. The families were used to their children waking up in the middle of the night, needing water or a comforting hug. But tonight was different. As the minutes passed, a strange sensation gripped the settlement. Parents began to check on their children, only to find their beds empty. Panic spread quickly. In the darkness, it was hard to see clearly. The only lights came from the stars above and the soft glow from street lamps that flickered nervously. A few brave parents ran to the homes of their neighbors, banging on doors, shouting for their missing sons and daughters. But no answers came. There was no sign of anyone. It was as if the children had vanished into thin air. Soon the entire colony was awake, and fear began to spread like wildfire. People gathered in small groups, looking frantically for any trace of their children. There were no signs of struggle, no broken windows, no marks on the ground. It was as if the children had simply disappeared, as if they had never existed at all. The colony's leaders quickly called an emergency meeting. The council members, usually calm and collected, were now visibly shaken. There had been no warning, no reason to believe anything was wrong. The records showed no unusual activity in the area, no reports of strange ships in the sky. The security systems had picked up nothing unusual. But something was terribly wrong. Captain Lara Hunt, the leader of the colony's defense team, stood at the front of the room, her face pale with worry. She had never seen anything like this in all her years of service. "We need to find the children," she said, her voice steady, but her hands trembling slightly. "Something isn't right. We must assume this was no accident." The council members exchanged worried glances. They had no answers, no leads. All they knew was that their children were gone, and they had no idea where to start looking. Far from the colony, on the edge of the galaxy, the Zalvok, an ancient and powerful alien race, watched with cold eyes. Their mission had been simple: abduct the human children from Terra Nova and take them for experimentation. The Zalvok had studied humans from afar, believing them to be weak and insignificant. They saw no harm in taking a few children for their experiments. After all, they had captured children from countless other worlds, and none had ever been a problem. But they had underestimated humanity. The Zalvok's leader, Karnath, stood in his command center, observing the results of the operation. His eyes narrowed as he saw the humans begin to stir, realizing that the children were missing. His soldiers had executed the plan flawlessly, but Karnath felt a growing sense of unease. It was always easier to abduct children from primitive planets where the population was unaware of advanced technology. But this time was different. This colony, though small, was more advanced than they had anticipated. They had systems in place to notice the disappearance of their children almost immediately. "Did the humans see us?" Karnath muttered to his second-in-command, Varrock. "No, my lord," Varrock replied. "We ensured the operation was silent. The humans had no idea we were here. They won't realize the children are gone until morning." But Karnath wasn't convinced. There was something about this planet that didn't sit right with him. Terra Nova was a world filled with potential, a world where humans had begun to make strides in science and technology. The Zalvok had done their homework. They had chosen this target carefully, expecting little resistance. But now, Karnath could feel that something was off, and the humans' reaction to the disappearance only confirmed his suspicion. They were not as helpless as he had thought. Back on the planet, Lara Hunt stood in front of the large, holographic map of the colony, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was joined by several other leaders, and their discussions grew more urgent by the second. "We need to organize search teams," Lara said firmly. "We have no idea where the children could be, but we can't just sit here and wait. We'll search the entire colony and its surrounding areas." "Agreed," replied Jard, the colony's chief scientist. "We'll need to set up a perimeter. We don't know if this is an isolated incident or if there are others involved." As Lara looked at the map, her thoughts raced. Where could the children have gone? How had they vanished without a trace? It felt like a bad dream, but she knew it was real. Whatever had taken the children, it wasn't natural. Something more dangerous was at play. With each passing hour, the fear grew. The parents were becoming more desperate, their eyes wild with worry. Lara knew time was running out. If they didn't find the children soon, there was no telling what could happen next. The situation was spiraling out of control. But what no one knew was that the disappearance of the children was just the beginning. The real danger had only just begun to unfold, and the galaxy would soon learn that the Zalvok's mistake was much bigger than anyone could have imagined. And the humans would be the ones to make them pay. A galactic mistake. The human colony on Terra Nova had never experienced a threat like this before. It had been hours since the children disappeared, and the panic only grew stronger. Families, once full of joy and laughter, were now filled with fear and confusion. The once peaceful world was turning into a nightmare. But as the humans scrambled to find answers, far beyond their planet, the alien race responsible for this tragedy watched with growing unease. Karnath, the leader of the Zalvok, stood on the bridge of his massive starship, his dark eyes fixed on the holographic map of Terra Nova. He looked calm on the outside, but inside, a storm was brewing. The plan had gone perfectly, or so he had thought. The children had been taken without a sound, and their minds would be used for experimentation. No one would ever know what happened. But as the minutes passed, he began to realize the extent of his error. The Zalvok, proud and powerful as they were, had made a critical mistake. They had underestimated the humans. "We were too hasty," Karnath muttered under his breath. "They are more resilient than we thought." Varrock, his second in command, looked at him with a mixture of confusion and concern. "What do you mean, my lord? The humans are nothing compared to the might of the Zalvok. Their resistance is insignificant." But Karnath wasn't so sure anymore. He had studied humanity for years, watching from the shadows, gathering intel. He had believed the humans were no different from the countless other species they had conquered. But now, something had changed. The humans of Terra Nova were different. There was a fire in them, a kind of unity that made them strong, and their reaction to the disappearance of their children was proof of that. "You don't understand," Karnath said, packing in frustration. "The humans are not like the others we've taken before. They won't just sit idly by. They will come for their children, and they will come for us." Back on Terra Nova, the clock was ticking. Lara Hunt and her team were beginning to realize just how much trouble they were in. As much as they wanted to think it was just some freak accident or natural occurrence, deep down, they all knew that something far more sinister was at play. This wasn't just a random event, it was an attack. But by who and why? The colony had no enemies. It was a peaceful settlement. They had no reason to believe anyone would want to harm them. Yet someone had come from the stars, taken their children, and left without a trace. "We're missing something," Lara said, her voice firm but filled with frustration. "We're not looking at this the right way. We need to think bigger." Her mind raced, running through every possible scenario. Could the children have wandered off? Could it be a natural disaster? No, that didn't make sense. There were no signs of struggle, no warning systems triggered. This wasn't something that just happened. This was planned. Jard, the colony's chief scientist, approached with an idea. What if this wasn't just an ordinary kidnapping? What if they were taken for a reason, something more strategic? Lara turned to face him. "What do you mean?" "I've been reviewing the colony's records. The Zalvok have been studying us for years. We've never been aware of it, but their spies have been keeping an eye on our development. They've watched how quickly we've advanced in technology. We may have become too much of a threat." Lara froze. "You think this was an attack?" Jard nodded gravely. "Not just any attack. A calculated one. They must have taken the children for some kind of experiment. We have to assume they are using them for something they think will help them control us." The room fell silent as everyone took in the possibility of what was happening. It was no longer just about missing children. It was about survival. The fate of their entire colony was now on the line. Meanwhile, far in the depths of space, the Zalvok had begun to realize the true cost of their actions. They had taken the children, believing they were nothing more than pawns, easy to control, easy to use. They believed the humans were weak, but now they were seeing the first signs of the power they had awakened. Zalvok technology was far more advanced than anything the humans had developed, but they had no idea that the human children, under the right conditions, could manipulate this technology. It was part of the Zalvok's mistake. They had taken something that they couldn't fully understand, the potential power of human will and intellect. Back on Terra Nova, Lara Hunt was now facing a much greater problem. It wasn't just a matter of finding the children. They needed to prepare for war. The Zalvok were far more dangerous than any enemy they had ever faced, and the humans of Terra Nova were about to find out just how deadly the Zalvok could be. The search teams spread out across the colony, moving with purpose. Their goal was clear: find the children. But there was more at stake now than just the lives of a few innocent kids. The survival of Terra Nova itself was on the line. As the search continued, Lara received an urgent message from the outskirts of the colony. One of the scouts had discovered something that made her blood run cold. The scout had found evidence of a Zalvok ship. It was hidden deep within the forest, far away from the main settlement, and it was from that ship that the abductions had begun. But more chilling than the ship itself was what they found nearby: marks on the ground, strange energy signatures, and an eerie silence that felt unnatural. The humans were not just fighting to save their children anymore. They were fighting for their very existence. And the Zalvok, so confident in their victory, had just made a catastrophic mistake. The humans were not weak. They had just begun to show the galaxy exactly what they were capable of. The war for Terra Nova was about to begin, and the Zalvok were in for a rude awakening. The power awakens. As the first rays of dawn broke across Terra Nova, the world had transformed. What was once a peaceful, thriving colony was now a place of tension and fear. Every corner was filled with whispers, every home was empty, and the streets that had been filled with children's laughter were now eerily quiet. The search for the missing children was intensifying, but every hour that passed only brought more uncertainty. There was no sign of the aliens responsible for the abductions, and no clues that led to the children's whereabouts. Lara Hunt stood on a small balcony overlooking the main settlement, her eyes scanning the horizon. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. The disappearance of the children had shaken her, but what Jard had suggested about the Zalvok was even more disturbing. The Zalvok weren't just here to abduct children, they were here to manipulate them. And if Jard was right, that meant the children had something within them that the aliens wanted, something that the Zalvok couldn't even begin to comprehend. But what was it? In the depths of space, the Zalvok had already begun to realize that their plans were beginning to unravel. The Zalvok leader, Karnath, paced in his war room aboard his flagship, his mind racing. His soldiers had taken the children, sure, but there had been something unsettling about their capture. He had underestimated the humans, and now they were pushing back in ways he hadn't anticipated. "Have you seen this, Varrock?" Karnath snapped, turning to his second-in-command, who stood with a data pad in hand. Varrock looked up, his expression grave. "Yes, my lord, the children's biology is strange. We had expected them to be simple, easy to control, but they seem to be adapting in ways that no human should be able to." "Adapting?" Karnath echoed, his voice growing dark. "What do you mean?" The Zalvok had abducted countless children from other planets, using them for genetic experiments and as energy sources, but human children were proving to be different. Karnath hadn't believed it at first, but now, after analyzing the children's data, it was clear. They weren't like other species. Something in their physiology was far more complex, far more powerful than anything the Zalvok had ever encountered. "We believe their minds and bodies are evolving at an accelerated rate," Varrock explained, his tone cautious. "The children are beginning to develop unusual abilities. Some of them are showing signs of telepathic connection. Others have heightened reflexes and strength beyond normal human limits." Karnath clenched his fists, a sense of dread creeping over him. He had made a fatal mistake. The children weren't just innocent victims, they were the key to something far more powerful. Back on Terra Nova, Lara was preparing for a mission unlike any the colony had ever seen. The Zalvok were not only dangerous, they were now aware that humanity was capable of more than they had ever imagined. But what the Zalvok didn't know was that the humans were just beginning to understand their own potential. The disappearance of the children had forced them to rethink everything they knew about themselves. Jard had spent days analyzing the strange energy signatures found near the Zalvok ship, and he had uncovered something unexpected. "Lara," he said, his voice filled with excitement and disbelief, "I think I've found it. The Zalvok might be using some kind of technology to manipulate the children, but there's something else going on here, something they didn't plan for." Lara raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" I think the children, especially the ones who were abducted from the older families, have started to tap into abilities that even we don't fully understand. The Zalvok may have intended to turn them into weapons, but the children are actually becoming a kind of energy source. They're tapping into something deep within themselves. And if we can harness that energy, we might be able to turn the tide of this war. Lara stared at him, trying to process what he had just said. Could this be possible? The human children weren't just victims, they were something more, something dangerous. Meanwhile, in the alien ship, the Zalvok were preparing to run tests on the children. They were already struggling to control the overwhelming energy surging through them. The children were growing stronger with every passing hour. Their bodies, once fragile and soft, were beginning to exhibit unnatural strength. Their minds were expanding beyond their comprehension, and the Zalvok couldn't stop it. Karnath stood in front of a glass chamber, watching as one of the children, a young girl, looked back at him with bright, defiant eyes. She was no older than 10, yet she radiated power. A blue aura surrounded her, her small hands glowing with strange energy. "We need to stop this," Karnath muttered under his breath. "We need to contain them before they get too strong. If they realize what they're capable of, it's over for us." But as the Zalvok leader turned to his second-in-command, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The girl's glowing hands suddenly flickered with intense light, and she lifted her hands, without any visible effort. The chamber doors began to tremble, and then with an explosive crack, they flew open. The girl was free. The Zalvok soldiers rushed to contain her, but they were too slow. With a single motion, the child slammed the door shut with a burst of raw energy, sending the soldiers flying backward. Karnath stared in shock. The child, who was once a helpless victim, had just turned into a weapon far beyond anything the Zalvok had ever anticipated. Back on Terra Nova, Lara's mission had changed from finding the children to something far more dangerous. The humans weren't just going to rescue their children, they were going to prepare for a fight. The Zalvok had underestimated them, but that was about to change. They were no longer dealing with defenseless humans. They were dealing with humans who had awakened to their true potential. Lara's team, now fully armed and prepared, set out towards the Zalvok ship, determined to rescue the children and fight back. But as they neared the ship's location, Lara felt a strange sensation, a feeling she couldn't quite place. The air seemed charged, the ground humming beneath her feet. It wasn't just the children who had changed. Humanity had begun to awaken something ancient within themselves, a power that would shake the galaxy to its core. The Zalvok had made a mistake, a big one, and now humanity was ready to show them just how dangerous they really were. The awakening storm. The sun had barely begun to rise on Terra Nova, yet the colony was already buzzing with a tension so thick, it was almost tangible. Lara Hunt stood at the helm of the rescue mission, watching as her team prepared to make their move against the Zalvok. The stakes had shifted from a simple rescue operation to a full-scale battle for the future of humanity. And Lara could feel it in her bones. The war for their survival had begun. But as she stood there, she couldn't help but wonder, what was it about their children that made the Zalvok so desperate? Why had the aliens underestimated them so completely? And more importantly, how were the children suddenly displaying such extraordinary powers? The pieces didn't fit together, but one thing was certain. The humans weren't just going to fight for their children. They were going to fight to change the course of galactic history. Inside the Zalvok ship, Karnath stood in stunned silence, watching the chaos unfold on his bridge. The child who had escaped, the one who had unleashed a storm of energy from her small hands, had triggered something inside the Zalvok leadership. The power she had displayed wasn't something they had seen before, not in any species they had encountered. The Zalvok, though powerful in their own right, now found themselves outmatched in ways they couldn't explain. Varrock, his trusted second-in-command, entered the room, his face etched with worry. "My lord, this is getting out of hand. The children! They're awakening abilities far beyond our control. We thought we could use them for experimentation, but now they are becoming something else. Something we can't contain." Karnath's mind raced. "I don't care how powerful they are. We took them for our own purposes. They will submit to us or they will perish." But as he said those words, doubt gnawed at him. The children weren't just reacting with fear or anger. They were evolving, growing stronger with every moment, as if they were unlocking a hidden part of themselves. This wasn't just a simple rebellion. It was something far deeper, far more ancient, and the Zalvok weren't equipped to handle it. The girl who had escaped, the one with the glowing hands, had somehow managed to breach the ship's security systems. something that should have been impossible for anyone, let alone a child. She had disrupted the ship's energy core, sending shockwaves throughout the ship that rendered most of the Zalvok soldiers temporarily incapacitated. Meanwhile, back on Terra Nova, Lara's team was preparing to launch their assault. The humans had no intention of playing by the Zalvok's rules. They had been pushed to the edge, but now, with the mysterious powers of their children on the line, they were ready to make a stand. "We're not just rescuing our kids," Lara said, addressing her team, her voice steady but fierce. "We're taking back what's ours, and we're showing the galaxy that the humans of Terra Nova will never bow to anyone, not the Zalvok, not anyone." Her words hit their mark, and her team nodded, their resolve hardening. They weren't going to let these aliens think they could walk over them. The children had awakened something deep inside them, something that had been dormant for centuries, something tied to the core of humanity itself. As they moved toward the Zalvok ship, Lara couldn't help but notice a shift in the air, a strange, almost palpable energy humming around them. It wasn't just the approaching storm of battle. There was something in the atmosphere, something new. It was as if the very planet itself was reacting to the presence of the Zalvok, pushing back against the invaders. Terra Nova was alive, and it was beginning to fight back. Back on the Zalvok ship, Karnath was losing control. His soldiers were panicking, struggling to maintain order as more children broke free from their containment cells. Some were displaying abilities beyond anything he had anticipated. They were using telepathy to communicate with each other, coordinating their movements with alarming precision. Others had developed the ability to manipulate the ship's systems, bypassing security measures with ease. The Zalvok had thought they were the ones in control, but now the children were taking control of their own fate. Karnath stormed into the containment chamber, where a small group of children stood, their eyes glowing with an eerie blue light. They were calm, too calm for their age, as if they had transcended the fear and confusion that should have consumed them. "You think you can defy us?" Karnath shouted, his voice dripping with contempt. One of the children, a boy no older than 8, looked up at him, his eyes cold and defiant. "We are not your prisoners," he said, his voice surprisingly clear and full of authority. "You made a mistake. You don't understand us. You don't understand humanity." The room seemed to pulse with energy as the boy raised his hand, a wave of invisible force pushing Karnath and his guards back. The Zalvok leader staggered, struggling to regain his footing, but he realized with a chilling clarity that the children were no longer weak or helpless. They were evolving into something powerful, something he could never have imagined. On Terra Nova, Lara and her team finally reached the Zalvok ship. The massive, sleek vessel loomed in front of them, its dark metallic surface reflecting the light of the twin moons above. It was imposing, a symbol of the alien race's dominance, but for Lara it was nothing more than a target. As they made their way toward the ship's entrance, they suddenly felt it, an overwhelming force like the pulse of the planet itself emanating from within the ship. It was a strange energy, unlike anything they had encountered before. It wasn't just coming from the children. They were the conduit for something bigger, something tied to the very fabric of humanity's existence. Lara took a deep breath, steeling herself. "This is it," she said, her voice full of determination. "We go in, we find the children, and we get them out. We make sure the Zalvok know who they're messing with." As the doors to the ship slid open, Lara's team entered the belly of the beast, prepared for whatever lay ahead. The ship was massive, its corridors twisting and turning in disorienting ways. But Lara wasn't focused on the layout of the ship, she was focused on the children, and on the strange power that was radiating from within. Back inside the ship's command center, Karnath felt the shift in the air. Something was coming. The Zalvok were losing control, and now, as the humans prepared to storm the vessel, it was clear that they had made a fatal miscalculation. Humanity had evolved in ways the Zalvok had never understood. The children weren't just victims of their capture, they were a catalyst for something far greater, something that would change the course of the galaxy forever. And now, the Zalvok were about to find out what happens when you underestimate the power of the human spirit. The storm was coming, and this time it was the Zalvok who were the prey. The battle for Terra Nova. The air inside the Zalvok ship was thick with tension. Lara Hunt and her team moved cautiously through the maze of corridors, each step bringing them closer to the heart of the enemy's vessel. The alien ship, though advanced and formidable, felt strangely alien to them. It was a place of cold metal and harsh angles, a world that seemed designed for domination, not survival. But Lara knew one thing for sure. Zalvok technology might be advanced, but humanity had something more powerful: resolve. As they navigated the ship's interior, the strange energy that had been building in the air around them intensified. It wasn't just a feeling now, it was a presence. A powerful force seemed to be emanating from the children. Lara couldn't explain it, but it was almost as if their very souls were resonating with the ship itself. "Do you feel that?" Jard whispered, his voice barely audible as they moved forward. Lara nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "I do. It's coming from the center of the ship. We're getting closer." Meanwhile, deep within the Zalvok command center, Karnath stood with a furrowed brow, staring at the holographic displays. The children had somehow turned their powers inward, strengthening each other through their connection. The air was thick with energy. Their minds were linked, telepathically and spiritually, and the Zalvok had no way of understanding the force they were awakening. Varrock, his ever-loyal second-in-command, stood beside him. "The humans are close. They've breached the outer defenses. What do we do, my lord?" Karnath's fists clenched in frustration. "We hold them off, do whatever it takes, but we can't let them reach the children." But Karnath had already begun to realize that it was no longer just about the children. The Zalvok had made a terrible mistake, one they couldn't correct. The humans, in their desperation and unity, had unlocked something far greater than they realized. The children's abilities weren't the product of alien technology. They were a force of nature, a cosmic energy tied directly to the human race itself. Karnath had underestimated the humans. The Zalvok had taken them for weak, simple creatures. But what they hadn't understood was the incredible depth of humanity's potential. Humanity had the power to evolve in ways no other species could, to adapt and awaken strengths that would challenge even the most advanced civilizations. And now, the Zalvok were facing the consequences of that miscalculation. Lara's team entered the heart of the ship, where the lights flickered, and the air grew heavy. They were in the central chamber, a massive open space filled with towering structures that pulsed with strange alien energy. It was here that the children were being held, and as Lara's eyes scanned the area, she saw them. There were dozens of children, all gathered in the center of the room. But they were no longer the innocent, frightened children they had been when first abducted. Their eyes glowed with an ethereal blue light, and their bodies radiated energy. They were floating, suspended in the air, surrounded by a swirling vortex of power. It was as if they were channeling some ancient, unknown force that hummed through the very air around them. Lara's heart skipped a beat as she realized the truth. They weren't just victims. The children had become the key, the link to something far more powerful than anyone could have imagined. "Get to the children," Lara shouted, and her team rushed forward. But before they could reach them, the entire chamber shook violently. Karnath had activated the ship's self-defense systems, and the walls around them erupted in a shower of sparks. The Zalvok soldiers, clad in dark armor and carrying energy weapons, charged forward, ready to fight. "We've got company," shouted one of Lara's team members. Lara didn't hesitate. She drew her weapon, a specialized pulse rifle, and fired at the oncoming enemies. The beam hit one of the soldiers, sending him crashing to the ground. But more kept coming, dozens of Zalvok soldiers, their weapons trained on the humans, closing in. "Move," Lara shouted, rallying her team. The humans fought back fiercely, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. The Zalvok were relentless, their weapons blazing with deadly force. But then something unexpected happened. The children, floating in the center of the chamber, suddenly reacted. Their eyes locked onto the humans. A collective energy pulsed outward from them, and the Zalvok soldiers froze mid-step. The air around the children shimmered, and the ground beneath them cracked open with a blinding blue light. Lara's eyes widened. The children weren't just manipulating energy, they were controlling the ship's systems. They were tapping into its core, turning the Zalvok technology against its creators. "Stay close," Lara yelled, pulling her team back as the energy surge intensified. The Zalvok soldiers screamed as the lights in the room flickered out of control, and their weapons malfunctioned. The children's powers were so overwhelming that they were now warping the very fabric of the Zalvok ship. The force was becoming a storm, and the Zalvok had no way to stop it. Karnath, watching from his command station, was losing control of his ship. "What is happening?" he shouted, pounding his fist against the console. The children were no longer passive victims. They had become the conduits of human power, a power that was tied to the very core of their being. They had awakened a force older than the stars themselves. On the battlefield, Lara's team fought with renewed determination. The Zalvok were no longer a threat. They were being overpowered by the very technology they had created. The children's powers had become a weapon against them. "Move," Lara shouted, leading the charge toward the children. "We have to get them out of here." But as they reached the center of the chamber, one of the children, the young girl who had first escaped, turned to Lara. Her glowing blue eyes met Lara's, and in that moment Lara felt a connection, something deeper than words, something that transcended understanding. "Save them," the girl whispered, her voice echoing in Lara's mind. "The Zalvok cannot control us, but you must help us protect our world, your world." Lara's heart raced as the truth hit her. The children weren't just powerful. They were now the guardians of Terra Nova, and it was up to humanity to protect them, to ensure that their power was used for good, not destruction. With a single, united effort, the humans and the children of Terra Nova fought back against the Zalvok. The power of humanity's resolve, combined with the extraordinary potential of the children, created a force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Zalvok had made a fatal mistake. They had thought they could control humanity. But now they would face the true strength of the human spirit and the awakening of a power that would change the galaxy forever. The battle for Terra Nova was only just beginning, but in the hearts of the humans and their children, hope burned brighter than ever before. And the Zalvok would soon learn humanity was not to be underestimated. The unseen tide. The battle for Terra Nova had taken a turn none of the Zalvok had anticipated. As the children's power surged through the ship, the Zalvok soldiers found themselves paralyzed, their weapons useless, their technology fighting against them. The Zalvok were the conquerors of countless worlds, but they had never faced anything like this before. Lara Hunt watched as her team fought with all they had, but she knew it was not just firepower that would win this battle. It was the bond between humanity and the children. They were no longer just trying to free the children from captivity. They were witnessing the birth of a new power that could reshape the very fabric of the galaxy. The young girl with the glowing eyes, the one who had freed herself from the Zalvok's containment chamber, stood at the center of the swirling energy, her hands raised. Her small figure was surrounded by an aura of blinding light, and her eyes locked onto Lara, with a silent plea for help. Lara moved forward, her pulse racing, as the world around her seemed to blur into chaos. She could feel the children's power, like an electric current that pulsed in time with her own heartbeat. The walls of the Zalvok ship trembled, the floors quaked beneath her, and the air itself seemed to distort, alive with energy. But the Zalvok were not yet defeated. Karnath was not one to surrender so easily. Inside the command chamber, Karnath had begun to realize that the Zalvok were losing this war, not just on Terra Nova, but across the galaxy. Their very existence was being threatened by the rising human force, an unstoppable tide of unity and willpower that they had never encountered. For the first time in his long life, the Zalvok leader felt fear, not the typical fear that came from being outnumbered, but the fear of the unknown. Varrock, his ever-faithful second-in-command, stepped forward. "My lord, the ship is destabilizing. The children's energy is affecting everything. We can't contain it." Karnath clenched his fists in frustration, his eyes burning with a mixture of rage and disbelief. How did we not see this coming? These humans, these children, they are the catalyst, not the victims. Their power is not from us, nor any technology we possess. Varrock's face darkened. "I think we've underestimated them, my lord. It's not just the children, it's humanity itself. They are tapping into something greater than us, something beyond what we've ever understood." Karnath turned away from his second-in-command, packing in tight circles. "The galaxy will never forgive us for this. We will either control this power or we will perish trying." His eyes narrowed. "Get the remaining forces to the heart of the ship. If we can neutralize their connection to the energy, we may still have a chance." But deep down, Karnath knew that their window was closing. The children's power was not something the Zalvok could control. It was a force that was simply too wild, too deeply connected to humanity's will. If they couldn't shut it down, then the Zalvok would face annihilation. Back on Terra Nova, the battlefield was a chaotic dance between the remaining Zalvok soldiers and the humans. The Zalvok's advanced weapons and armor were no match for the combined force of the humans and the children's newfound power. Every time a soldier aimed their weapon, the children's telepathic energy shielded them, redirecting the blasts with ease. Lara moved with precision, each step carrying her closer to the heart of the chaos. Her mind raced as she tried to connect the dots. It wasn't just the children's power. There was something about the connection between the humans and the children, something deeply ancient that was only now beginning to awaken. The young girl, still floating at the center of the chamber, reached out a hand toward Lara. Her voice echoed in Lara's mind again. "The force within us. It is ancient, but we are not alone. We are a part of something much bigger." Lara's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" The girl's voice was calm, but there was a sadness in it, as if she knew what was coming. "You are part of this awakening. The humans, they are connected to the stars themselves. Your power is not just your own. It's the power of your ancestors, the force of your will to survive." Suddenly, the air around them crackled as if an invisible storm was rising. The children's energy grew more intense, feeding on the planet itself, and the very walls of the ship seemed to be alive, twisting and groaning in response to the power being unleashed. Lara looked around in awe as the children's glowing eyes turned to the sky, their hands raised in unison. A pulse of pure energy shot through the room, tearing open the walls and causing the Zalvok ship to shudder. "We have to get them out now," Lara said, grabbing the young girl's hand. "Come with us, we can't let them control you anymore." But the girl hesitated. "It's too late," she said softly, her voice carrying an undertone of finality. "The Zalvok have already made their decision. They will destroy themselves trying to control what they cannot." Lara's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the power surging, building to an impossible crescendo. She looked back at her team. "Move now." They had no choice. With or without the children's cooperation, the Zalvok ship was already tearing itself apart. The children had become the key to a force so ancient that even the Zalvok could not understand it. Humanity had awakened something deep inside the stars themselves, a power that was too old, too vast to be harnessed by any one species. Karnath watched in horror as the walls around him began to collapse. The ship was dying, and his soldiers were being swallowed by the very energy they had tried to contain. The Zalvok leader's mind raced as he ordered his forces to retreat, but it was clear, it was too late. The Zalvok had lost. As the Zalvok flagship exploded in a burst of blinding light, the power of the children flooded outward, dissipating into the atmosphere. Terra Nova was alive with a strange, surreal energy, as if the planet itself was awakening to a new dawn. On the surface, Lara and her team stood victorious, but not without scars. The children, now safe, had no idea what to do with their newfound powers. They had become something far greater than anyone had ever anticipated, a force of nature, of humanity's will to survive. Lara knew one thing: this was only the beginning. Terra Nova had changed, humanity had changed, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The children had unleashed a new power, one that the Zalvok could never understand. The Zalvok had come to conquer, but in the end, it was humanity who had awakened. And now, the universe would have to reckon with the rising tide of the human spirit. The shifting horizon. The explosions had died down, but the aftershocks of the battle still rippled through Terra Nova. As the Zalvok flagship crumbled into the atmosphere, pieces of its wreckage scattered across the barren landscape like meteors. The dust was still settling, but the humans and their children stood in the midst of it, caught between victory and something else, an uncertain future. Lara Hunt gazed out at the horizon, her eyes scanning the desolate world that had once felt like nothing more than a refuge. Now it was the cradle of a new era. The energy that had surged through the ship, through the children, was still pulsing in the air, alive, tangible. It was as if the very fabric of reality had shifted. And in the distance, towering above the ruins, the first signs of the transformation began. Terra Nova was not just a planet anymore, it had become something else. A conduit, a link between the human spirit and the stars. The children, their faces illuminated by the fatting light, looked different. They were still the same children who had been snatched from their homes, but now their eyes carried a quiet wisdom, an ancient knowledge that hadn't been there before. They had seen the impossible, and now they were the bearers of a power that defied comprehension. Lara stepped forward, her thoughts racing. The Zalvok had fallen, but the cost had been high. The world around them was changing, and there was no turning back. Yet in the midst of the chaos, something profound stirred within her. Humanity had become more than what it once was. "Do you feel it?" Jard's voice broke through the silence, his face grim but filled with awe. "The planet, it's alive, isn't it?" Lara nodded, unable to put it into words. "It's not just the planet, it's something deeper, something ancient. The children awakened it, but it's part of us too." Behind her, the rest of her team gathered, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. They had won, yes, but what had they really won? The Zalvok were defeated, but now they had a much bigger question to answer. What would humanity become in the wake of this battle? How would they wield this new power? In the heart of the ruined Zalvok ship, deep beneath the smoldering wreckage, a figure moved. Karnath, though weakened and battered, had managed to survive the explosion. His armor was scorched and his body was bruised, but he was still alive, by sheer will alone. His mind raced. The Zalvok were defeated, their technology broken, their plans in ruins. Yet somewhere deep inside him there was a flicker of something, a thought, an idea. The Zalvok had believed themselves to be the superior race, the invincible conquerors of the galaxy. But they had made a fatal miscalculation. They had underestimated the resilience and adaptability of humanity. The children weren't just the key to this planet's power. They were the key to something much larger, something that could shift the balance of power across the stars. Karnath's fingers clenched as he stared at the broken remains of his ship. The battle was lost, but not the war. He had seen the potential in the children, and even if he could no longer control them, perhaps there were others who would. The Zalvok were not the only race capable of harnessing power beyond comprehension. Meanwhile, Lara and her team moved toward the colony's central hub, where the children had gathered. They had been freed, but the transformation they had undergone was still unfolding. The young girl, the one who had first escaped the Zalvok, stood at the forefront, her eyes glowing faintly, her hands raised as though she could command the world around her. Lara approached cautiously, her heart heavy with a mix of hope and fear. "What now?" she asked softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. The girl turned to her, her expression serene yet distant. "The battle is over," she said, her voice echoing in Lara's mind. "But this is only the beginning. We have awakened something that cannot be undone." Lara's brow furrowed. "What do you mean, what are you becoming?" The girl's gaze shifted toward the stars, as if she could see beyond the horizon. "We are not just children anymore," she whispered. "We are the bridge between your world and the stars, but the power we have awakened, it will call others. There are forces out there, forces that will come to understand what we are capable of, and they will want it." Lara felt a chill run down her spine. She had suspected it, but hearing the words confirmed her worst fears. The Zalvok had been only the beginning. There were other civilizations out there, ones that had watched Terra Nova for centuries. And now they had seen what the children had unleashed. The humans weren't just a small, insignificant species anymore. They were a force that could change the future of the galaxy. Back in the depths of space, a Zalvok warlord, one who had been watching the downfall of Karnath's ship, smiled grimly as he observed the readings from his own fleet. His race may have been defeated on Terra Nova, but the potential in the human children had not gone unnoticed. "Prepare the fleet," the warlord commanded, his voice like ice. "If the children have truly unlocked this power, we must find a way to control it. Humanity is now the greatest threat to our empire." A cold, calculating plan began to form in the warlord's mind. The children were the key, and he would not let them slip through his grasp. The galaxy would see a new empire rise, one where the Zalvok and their new allies would control the power of the stars themselves. Back on Terra Nova, Lara and her team stood at the edge of the colony, looking out at the distant horizon. The children were now integrated into the colony, their powers growing stronger with each passing day. It was as if Terra Nova itself was helping them unlock their true potential, but with that power came responsibility. "Do you think we're ready for this?" Jard asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. Lara took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the stars above. "We don't have a choice. We're not just fighting for survival anymore, we're fighting for the future of everything." The silence that followed was filled with a weight neither of them could escape. The universe had changed, and so had humanity. But the most pressing question remained: what would they do with this newfound power? As the stars twinkled in the distance, a cold realization settled over them all. Humanity had just become the galaxy's greatest hope and its greatest threat, and there was no turning back. The tide had shifted, and now the battle for the future of the stars would begin.